And while it's difficult for young children to comprehend the carnage in Ukraine, it's infinitely worse to be a child, or for that matter, an adult living in that war-torn country. One Oklahoma man is experiencing that firsthand, and Steve Shaw spoke with him recently via Zoom. And we must warn you, some of the images you're about to see are disturbing.
Is Vladimir Putin Satan?
He's a communist.
Raymond Heckard is an Oklahoma City native. He's a retired state employee who got married and moved to the town of Kaminsky in west central Ukraine 6 years ago.
What should the United States do? Is this worth getting into World War III?
The truth is, World War III has already started.
In late February, Raymond and his family fled Kaminsky and headed to the Polish border, which is normally 6 hours by train or car, but it took them 17 hours. Raymond says they were lucky because it took others 2 or 3 days. Heckard and his family are now in Krakow, Poland, where he says they plan to start over. They don't expect to return to Ukraine.
This war, Putin's actions, are very much parallel what Germany was doing in the 1930s to the letter. I mean, Putin has given the Greater Russian speech, the Greater Slavic Nation speech. Hitler did the same thing in the Munich speech. And then he annexed Austria. Putin annexed Crimea.
C-130, so we were Robert O'Brien was President Donald Trump's national security advisor from 2019 until Trump left office. Tuesday, he spoke at an OU National Security Symposium in Oklahoma City. Ambassador, is this about Vladimir Putin's ego? Is it a land grab, or is it about oil and gas?
It's a land grab. I mean, Vladimir Putin has said that the greatest geopolitical tragedy of his lifetime was the breakup of the Soviet Union. He's always coveted Ukraine. He believes it's a buffer state that Russia should control as a buffer between Russia and the West. And so this is an old school territorial conquest. And we haven't seen it in Europe since 1938.
Mike Boettcher's been a network television war correspondent for nearly 4 decades. As a matter of fact, Boettcher says he was stationed across the street from Vladimir Putin nearly 33 years ago in East Germany when the Berlin Wall fell.
We've known he's always had that intent, that he would like to put together the Soviet Empire again, bring back the old band. But to go to this extent and try to seize an entire neighboring nation, I didn't expect he would go that far.
Larry Regans directs the Center for Intelligence and National Security at OU. He says the Ukraine city of Kyiv is essential to Putin.
In Kyiv particularly, Kyiv was in fact the origins of the Russian state. Okay, when Moscow was a forest, Kyiv was in fact the beginnings. All right, so for Putin, what he's really interested in is restoring what he sees as lost Russian lands.
Further complicating this, Regan says, is Europe gets 25% of its oil and about 40% of its gas supply from Russia.
We've got to cut off Russian sales of oil and gas. We've got to impose a penalty for Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Russia doesn't have a right to sell oil and gas to the West. It's a privilege. And that privilege should be revoked now because of Russia's behavior in Ukraine. And as we see the war crimes that are being exposed as Ukrainian forces retake the towns and cities that the Russians held, and seeing the civilians who've been killed and tortured, this just gives all the more impetus to putting full sanctions on the Russians.
I think it's just going to galvanize the world even more.
We don't have the luxury of saying we can pivot to Asia and ignore Europe, or we can exit the Middle East and have no consequences here in America. In fact, if you look at the war in Ukraine is not simply something that's producing an uptick in gas prices here, which it is, or an uptick in inflation. It has far more reaching consequences, because at the end of the day, What Putin has done is shattered any naive illusion that he lacks hostility towards the West, in particular America.
Steve Shaw, the Oklahoma News Report.